everyone, my name is Stonesy Boy, and welcome back to Reading with Stonesy. This is the second to final episode, and today we are reading pages 181 to 200, starting at the bottom of the page at half an hour later. As you may know, I'm not very excited about this book. It has been so far one of the weakest Fnaf books of the original 11 or 12. So, I'm pretty upset about that. But yeah, I guess without further ado and no more sulking, let's begin. A half hour later, Hudson is on his way to his office when Dwayne called on him. "You have to come and see this thing. It's creeptastic." "Leave him alone," Barry said. "Oh, come on. It's not a demon. It's an old animatronic. A whole animatronic. It's amazing. Look at the detail." Hudson wanted nothing but to go to the office, shut the door, lock it, and take a nap. But he wasn't going to give Dwayne the satisfaction, so he strolled down the hall as if he couldn't care less about what was in the crate. When he reached his friend, he dropped dead. Trying to wrestle the animatronic upright and get it propped against the wall, Barry and Dwayne had their arms around the most bizarre-looking thing Hudson had ever seen. Right, bizarre. He was using that word because he was using the word terrifying would mean that he was afraid. And he was afraid, but sure, didn't want to admit to anyone, including himself. Hudson called on an old trick he used when Lewis was on a rampage. He narrowed his eyes until the focus was almost down to a pinpoint. He learned that when he was young, that when your perspective was that narrow, what you're facing wasn't as horrifying. Using that pinpoint focus, all Hudson could see propped between Barry and Dwayne was a set of white staring eyes with heavy green lids. And that was enough to freak Hudson out. But it was also a small enough part of the thing his friends were wrestling with where he could act relaxed and unconcerned. Testing the theory, he spoke. "What are you doing with it? Dancing?" His voice sounded normal and light. He congratulated himself. "Faith wants the thing standing here against the wall," Barry said. He grunted and shifted his side of the life-size animatronic. "Did you get those hooks attached?" he asked Dwayne. "Or are you just going to flirt with it?" Dwayne pulled a couple hooks out of his pocket. "You hold on your side in place. I'll lean against my side, and I'll attach the hook on the wall. Then we'll switch places and set up the other side." "I'll leave it to you," Hudson said, turning to go to the office. "And want to go for dinner after work?" Barry called out. Hudson stopped and looked back. "Can't, sorry. Virgil isn't coming in this evening. I'll be here until tomorrow morning." "Sorry," Dwayne said. "That sucks to be you." "Thanks for that," Hudson said, shaking his head. "I'm just saying," Dwayne said. "Maybe the seals could teach you not to stick your foot in your mouth," Barry said to Dwayne as Hudson was walking away. Hudson fully expected to have an easy night of it, in spite of the addition of the new animatronic. He was feeling good, and when he closed the building up for the night, maybe pretending to be relaxed was actually making him feel more relaxed. He figured he could make a self-fulfilling prophecy thing work for him. And it did. Until he decided to poke the bear. That was when it got all courageous and resolved to face his peers. He spent the rest of the night paying for it. Normally, Hudson did his rounds the same direction in the same order. But tonight, he was eager, and he started at the end, intending to reverse his usual direction. This brought him to the new animatronic near the beginning of his circuit, instead of the end. As he approached the scruffy thing, he planned to face it right off and get it out of the way. He was going to rob it of its power to upset him. Good plan, but he forgot to squint his eyes. And he was planning on the thing talking to him either. Hudson strode down the inner hall, and he found the new animatronic hooked to the wall just where Dwayne and Barry left it. Poised in a friendly hand up to wave position, the animatronic's posture wasn't threatening, but really, anything that looked like this was threatening, no matter what it was doing. Hudson faced the animatronic. When it stumbled back, sucked in his breath, what in the world was he thinking it was supposed to be? At first glance, the robotic character attached to the wall appeared to be a rabbit. Sort of. With fur of greenish yellow, it was no ordinary rabbit, though not even a cartoon rabbit. It was the kind of rabbit Dr. Frankenstein might have created if he wanted to build a rabbit instead of a man. Ears torn, dozens of pieces of the body and limbs, yellow-green fur ripped away, or chewed away. It was hard to tell. This is a rabbit that would never have cuddled any child. It shouldn't have been seen by a child either. There were fur and it's torn. You could see metal pieces of the animatronic's structure, exposed wires linked to an oxidized metal frame, and something else. What was that? Hudson couldn't help himself. He leaned in to get a better look. Was that? No, it couldn't be. He studied the reddish and grayish areas that would be seen through the gaps of the fur and metal. It looked like Hudson took a step back and clutched at his nightstick. He realized he was breathing too fast, and he bent over to get a grip on himself. He needed to go back to squinting, but he couldn't. He just had to know. Stepping closer again, Hudson tilted the head of the better look at what he was finding under the fur and metal. He was going to show himself that the crazy flight of gruesome fancy was just that, fancy. But it wasn't. Hudson lifted a finger and carefully extended a hand far enough to touch what was inside the ravaged fur and exposed metal. He put its tip of the finger against the reddish material, and he jumped back as fast as he lost his balance and fell against the opposite wall. It was tissue. Maybe not, no, probably not human tissue, but it was some kind of bodily tissue. Who would want to terrify someone with gore like this? It couldn't be real. It's real, the scratchy voice said. Hudson stumbled back. It spoke! The animatronic spoke! No, that wasn't possible. Dwayne and Barry told him the thing was completely non-functional. Experts were going to be brought in to work on it, and even then, they figured it was beyond repair. If you weren't so stupid, I'd tell you more about it, the voice said. The voice was distinctive, way too distinctive. A bass voice of a blur like rasp, voice of the hint of a southern accent. Hudson knew that voice. It was Mr. Atkins' voice. Hudson drew his stick. How could Mr. Atkins' voice be coming out of this thing? Or did the voice come from the animatronic? No, Hudson didn't think so. The voice seemed to fill his head, something more from inside his ears than outside of them. He couldn't pin down the direction. Who said that? Hudson said. He looked around, then looked back at the animatronic. It hung on the wall, its tooth-filled mouth completely still. Hudson turned his head and looked up and down the hall. Stupid, the voice said again. Hudson whipped his gaze back to the animatronic's mouth. It was exactly what it had been before. Hudson stared at the mouth for several minutes. The voice didn't speak. The hallway was silent. Hudson blinked and looked down the length of the animatronic, staring at the jagged lower edge of the fur extending the exposed ankle. Bones? Were those bones? Nah, that was stupid. They had to be metal supports discolored by age. Do the math, the voice said. The voice and the word math brought back a rush of memories from Mr. Atkins' algebra class. Hudson could suddenly smell the chalk of the classroom, feel the sweat-dampened jeans sticking out of the hard seat of his desk. He could feel the classmates' eyes on him, feel Dr. Atkins' disdain. He wanted to run away and hide. Tears welled in Hudson's eyes, but then he remembered he wasn't a child anymore. He felt a surge of anger, and he shoved his nightstick in the animatronic's mouth. He heard a snap, a tinkle, and a clatter on the floor. He'd broken off one of the animatronic's teeth. Or had he? Was that a tooth there when he first approached the thing? This is nuts, Hudson said. He reached down and grabbed the animatronic. His intention was to carry it to the closet and lock it inside, but the thing was heavier than it looked, and it didn't budge from the wall. What kind of hooks did you use? Hudson asked the absent Dwayne. He peered the connections and couldn't figure out how to release them. Well, okay, this isn't good, right? This meant that the animatronic couldn't go anywhere. Hudson set his shoulders, turned, and strode down the hall, and the abomination hanging in the wall. He might have heard a whispered stupid as he went, but he wasn't sure and decided he'd pretend he hadn't. Instead, he marched into the dining room to do the rounds properly from the beginning. Striding past the tables, he thought that voice, that hadn't heard the voice in over 10 years. He hadn't thought about Mr. Atkin in the amount of time either. Why was he already hearing the voice that sounded like Mr. Atkin? Was someone playing a prank on Hudson? Would Dwayne and Barry do that? Dwayne, maybe, but not Barry. Let it go, Hudson told himself. Maybe he imagined the whole thing. He had got himself totally worked up about the place the last few days. He had never taken rejection well, and this disappointment in Faith, who had not lived up to her name, would have caused a little emotional crash and burn. Maybe his mind was tormenting him because he was tormenting himself for not handling Faith's question better. What would she have done if she had gotten the defensive? He could have just said, no, of course I didn't do it. Or what if he just said, did what? All innocent, made her explain her question. He could have said, that's not an easy question to answer. That would have been the most honest thing he could have said. Would she have gone out with him again if he hadn't snapped at her? Stop it, Hudson admonished himself. Going through these what-ifs and should-haves was beating his head against the brick wall. Hudson went through this archway and started passing a crippled arcade games. Since he was already carrying his nightstick, he beat a rhythm on the metal and plastic and wood as he passed the game remains. He did his every night. It broke up the tendium. Tonight's drumming session wasn't typical, though. As he drummed, Hudson swore he could hear singing. He stopped drumming, and the singing stopped. Who was singing? Hudson took a step back and looked around the dining room. His gaze slid past the characters on the stage, and then it jerked back. The characters. They moved since he'd passed them. The singing started again, and the characters' lips were moving. They were singing! But that was not possible. They were statues! Hudson went back to the arcade and started rapping his nightstick more loudly on the games. He was determined to drown out the impossible singing. Before Hudson could wrap the third game on the line, though, he got another surprise. This one was not as benign. Suddenly, Hudson's nightstick was ripped from his grasp and thrown across the room. Hit the wall with a thwack, and at the same time, Hudson's head slammed down onto his scarred wooden desk under the window of the bedroom. Why isn't your homework done? Lewis bellowed. The impact was powerful in the corner of his desk. The contact with Hudson's temple was sharp. so he was hit with a double whammy of searing pain and a blinding stream of blood flowing down into his eyes. Stumbling back, Hudson wiped the blood and trying to clear his vision so he could see Lewis enough to know what the man was going to do next. Lewis was hitting Hudson for years, but it was the first time Lewis had slammed his head into something. As Hudson wiped his eyes, he rotated, staggering, but didn't see anyone. Where was Lewis? He was gone. Hudson was alone in the arcade. Wait, what just happened? Pressing his hand to the bleeding wound in his hairline, Hudson blinked at the arcade game in front of him, a bent and crooked Alien Invaders type game. He saw the blood on the metal frame. He wasn't in his bedroom. Lewis didn't just slam his head into the desk. His head had just been slammed into the game. Hudson looked at his nightstick. He couldn't find it, and he wouldn't stop the bleeding with his hand. He had to get back to the office. He had a first aid kit there, but was it safe? Something really weird was going on. Why did he hallucinate a scene from his childhood? A muted thud sounded from a few feet away. "Who's there?" Hudson shouted. He held still, listening. He heard nothing but his hitch breathing. He tried to ignore the pounding in his head so he could think. Blood trickled down a hand Hudson held with his head. Whatever happened, he needed to get a bandage to his wound. He couldn't just stand there. Retracing his steps through the dining room, Hudson scanned the area for a threat, but it's too dim and well shadowed for him to have a clear view of every part of the room. The tables and chairs, muted lighting, and cast shadows provided too many hidey holes for anyone who might want to attack or torment Hudson. Besides, he knew no one was there anyway. He was alone in the building, which made his happen all the more distressing. Still bleeding, Hudson rushed through the room. Then he jogged down the hall toward the office. He made it there without any trouble. After closing and locking the office door, Hudson checked all the monitors before awkwardly wiping blood from his wound and covering his fist with gauze, and then, with his surgical tape, while he doctored himself, he tried to ignore the pain throbbing in his temples. He tried not to think about the monitors showing no movement of any kind in the whole building. Hudson finished his first aid efforts and sank into his chair. He looked at his bloodied hands and then he got up. He had to go to the restroom and get himself cleaned up. He looked around the room. Without his nightstick, he felt exposed and vulnerable. He needed a weapon. He spotted a hammer he'd forgotten to return to the supply closet after he used it to fix the desk a couple days before. He picked it up, hefted it, swung it, and nodded, satisfied. This would work. He took a breath, checked the monitors again, and then turned toward... Wait. He looked back to the monitors. He blinked and rubbed his eyes. His vision was a little blurry, probably from both the blood in his eyes and the blow to the head. Was he seeing that wrong? He leaned toward the monitor and questioned. No, he wasn't seeing it wrong. He was seeing what he was seeing. There was an animatronic that was supposed to be latched, immobile, and trapped in the wall in the inner wall. Hudson flung the office door open, gripping the hammer so hard the knuckles turned white. He strode down the hall to the... Oh, hell. It was gone. It was really gone. Hudson gawked at the empty hooks hanging in the wall. Hudson heard the scuffling sound behind him. He whirled. Nothing was there. Or was something there? Hiding just past that tile of the character suits. Hudson pulled out his flashlight and showed it around the highway. No, he didn't see any movement. He took the step down the hall, moving toward the bathroom. Turning into the circles constantly, he tried to be aware of the entire hallway at once. He wished he had eyes in the back of his head. He made it to the men's bathroom without further incident. Pushing his door open, he sensed and raised the hammer. Who knew what was lurking in here? Was the mutilated rabbit waiting for him? Hudson snorted the word rabbit. Was he thinking the animatronic was a rabbit because it made him feel better to think of the thing as threatening as a teddy bear? But of course, that was ignorance. Stupid, Mr. Atkins' voice said. Hudson whirled. He was alone. Again, he couldn't tell where Mr. Atkins' voice came from because it was his voice. Hudson was sure of it. For once, Mr. Atkins was right. It was stupid to think the animatronic was a rabbit, but it was as much a rabbit as Hudson was. No, the abomination that Hudson's friends had commonly installed the morning was not a rabbit at all. It was a robot, and it was more. Hudson was pretty sure the remains of a corpse were stuck inside the rabbit suit skeleton. He wasn't 100% convinced, but he was convinced enough. Quickly checking before the stalls were empty, Hudson held the hammer in one hand while he splashed water in his free hand. He quickly realized that his clumsy way to clean up was going to work, but after double-checking the room, he set down the hammer and started to wash his hands and preparing for cleaning up his face. He should have never set down the hammer. Hudson went on standing still, backpedaling toward the handicap-accessible stall in a half-blink of a second. He was by the sink, and then he wasn't. Now he was skidding across the bathroom, hauled by the unseen hands toward the toilet of the biggest stall. Hudson screamed, "Stop it!" and tried to grab at the stall doorway as he went through it. Couldn't get a grip on it to stop the progress. He slid the few feet from the toilet. "Hold him down," one of the boys shouted. "Get his shoulders," another one yelled. Hudson got one last glimpse of the gray linoleum floor of the boys' bathroom before he felt his head going into the toilet. He closed his eyes and his mouth just as he submerged. Then the water swirled around a sound of laughter. Hudson failed and trashed and fell back into the closed door of the stall. He coughed and spit and tried to upchuck what little food he had in his stomach. Water oozed down his neck and trickled on his shirt. "Get away from me!" he screamed at the bullies tormenting him, even though he knew that yelling would spur them to do something else to him. He tensed, bracing for another assault, but nothing happened. Hudson looked around. His gaze fell to the floor, the black and white floor. He squinted at it and then put a hand on it. No gray linoleum. His upper lip curled in the scent of urine. Hudson hefted himself to his feet, fumbled in the stall door, and bolted for the nearest sink. He stuck his head under the faucet and scrubbed his face and hair with the hottest water he could stand. When he was done, he used the pile of paper towels to dry himself off as well as he could. Then Hudson looked back into the stall as he exited. He stared at it. What was wrong with it? Something wasn't right. Hudson took a step back, then he took 2 steps forward. No, that wasn't possible, but it was. The toilet in the stall and the star floor were completely dry, and it smelled the way the rest of the restroom smelled, like soap and disinfectant. If he just whipped his head out of urine-filled toilet, water would be splashed all over, and the stall would still have acidic putrid scent. But how could the stall look suddenly pristine? Hudson could make sense of this, and it made him angry. Think you've got me, didn't you? Hudson shouted. But he didn't know when he was shouting at, and what made him even angrier. What do you want? He screamed, to whom or what he didn't know. Nothing answered. Hudson breathed heavily for several seconds. Then he sighed. Okay, I give. He wasn't sure what he was going to accomplish give in to this opponent. Who was his opponent? But maybe acting meek would buy him some time to figure out what was going on. Ha! Acting meek. He wasn't acting at all. He wanted to surrender, wave the white flag, and roll over on his back like a submissive puppy. He wasn't up for whatever kind of warfare he was in. He didn't understand it, and he wasn't equipped for it. Speaking of which, he picked up the hammer. He didn't want to stay in the bathroom all night. He might as well head back to the office. He took a step. He stopped when he heard a chuckle. That was a chuckle, right? Yes, and there's another one. Now he was being laughed at. Where was the laughter coming from? Sounding like it was coming from above him, Hudson looked up. Sure enough, there was the source of the laughter. The yellow-green rabbit's head was hanging out through the opening of the big vent through the wall. Its mouth was open, and it was laughing its head off. Hudson roared and threw his hammer at the tooth-filled head. The head disappeared back into the vent. Hudson stared at the opening. He had to pursue, didn't he? First, if he didn't pursue, he'd know he was a coward. Second, he would know where the rabbit went if it didn't follow it. If he didn't know where it was, he was in more danger. Before he could think about it, Hudson jumped up onto the toilet seat, climbed onto the pipes, and then the top of the stall door. He grabbed the lip of the vent and heaved himself to the cavernous tube of the ceiling. Once there, it went rigid. Expecting further attack, nothing happened. He pulled out his flashlight, flipped it on, and shined it around. He was alone. He stopped and sat at the giant vent. He was doing in there. It was crazy, but he didn't want to go after the animatronic rabbit. Hudson straightened his shoulders. Yes, he did. He wasn't going to be a sniveling kid anymore. He was going to stand up to the bullies and the miserable stepdad. He was going to go rabbit hunting. Hudson giggled at his joke. When his giggle sound was demented in his own ears, was he slipping in and out of the present and his past? For a second, he was a kid pretending that he had the courage to go after the bullies who hurt him. But it was just a second. He knew where he was, and he knew he had to go on the offense where he was going to go lose his mind. Getting onto the hands and knees, Hudson put his flashlight in his mouth and crawled away from the opening in the men's restroom, stopping every few feet to take the flashlight from his mouth and aim it away. And that, while he listened for sounds, he got about 20 feet before he encountered his first character head. Startled, he lifted his own head and bumped it into the meadow above him. He scuttled backward and stared at the face looking back at him. It was Freddy Fazbear himself. Not really, it was just Freddy Costume Head, an old, nearly threadbare one. Or was that Threadbare? Hudson giggled again, but he had to admit the giggle was too childish sounding. He needed to focus on the task at hand. Find the escape rabbit? No. Find the bullies? No. Find the strange animatronic. He scooted forward the vent cover. He peered around the corner, and he sprouted another head. Again, he jumped so violently he banged the top of his head in the meadow above him. He forced himself to breathe calmly as he studied the head. It was Chica's, though her teeth were half gone and her bill was torn. His head had been attached to part of Chica's body. The body was just a shoulder and an arm, and a hand. Hudson gave the thing a wide berth, and watching it to be sure it wasn't suddenly grow feet and come after him. He didn't stop watching until he rounded a corner. Hudson didn't know how long he crawled through the vent system. He also didn't know how many heads he found. He lost track of both time and sensory input. Every stretch of the vent seemed like every other. Every turn was both familiar and unfamiliar. Several times he was sure he got a glimpse of a yellow-green fur up ahead. Each time, he stiffened and readied himself for an attack, but one never came. Twice, Hudson heard the scrabbling of little claws in the middle of the vent. He spotted one of the rats. He found rat droppings, too. Gross, Hudson said more than once when he put his palm in rat poop. Sometimes, when he stopped moving, Hudson was sure he heard swishing sounds or tapping sounds or clinks or bumps ahead of or behind him. Mostly, though, he heard his own breathing, his own ragged, labored breathing. Finally, his knees sore and his head throbbing and tingling, he decided he was never going to win the game of hide-and-seek in these vents, and he went back to the office to rewrap his head. So he turned to crawl down to the vent tunnel that went toward the light. He wasn't sure where he was building. He really gotten totally disoriented, but he sure had his leg strength to kick out a vent cover, and because the vent openings were huge and the ceilings were unusually tall, He figured he could jump from the vent opening to the ground no matter where he came out. He began crawling ahead, but something grabbed his foot. Something grabbed his foot and held on. Swallowing a scream, Hudson turned to look behind him, full expect to see nothing because he kept seeing nothing when he checked for sounds. But this time, something was there. Screaming, Hudson yanked his foot toward his body and sat up. Once again, he bashed the top of his head against the vent tunnel ceiling, but it didn't pause to care about it because the thing hanging on his foot was still hanging on. "Get off!" he screeched. "Get off!" Using his flashlight, he beat the yellow arm that had a grip on his foot. It was Chica again, the Chica head attached to the shoulder, arm, and hand, and the hand was hanging onto Hudson's foot as if his foot was an important thing in the world. Hudson shook his foot and pounded the yellow hand that wouldn't let go. I like you," a woman's voice said. Not just any woman's voice, Faith's voice. Hudson froze. He shined a flashlight back and forth in the vent tunnel. Then he aimed the light at Chica's mouth. Had the voice come from Chica? "I like you," the voice said again. The voice didn't sound like it was coming from the Chica head, just as Mr. Atkins' voice had come from the void Hudson couldn't locate. So did this one. His voice, however, had been more immediate impact on Hudson. He felt it squeezing his heart, touching him in the way that it had been when Faith did those very words to him on their first and their only date. "I like you," Faith had said. It was different, "I like you," than the casual way she'd said the words at work, before she basically told him to ask her out. In the restaurant, under the muted lights of the alcove where the small table was tucked, Faith's eyes had looked as soft and sincere when he said it. Then it wasn't just "I like you," that was actually what said was, "I like you a lot, Hudson. You're a nice guy." Then she reached across the table and touched his hand. Her fingers were smooth and warm, and when she turned her hand over and took hers in his, she didn't protest. She just smiled at him in the way no one had ever smiled at him before. Now, I feel like a hypocrite for two things. First of all, my voice is feeling a lot better, so I guess I just had to tough through it. I also drank an entire water bottle, so maybe that was it too. Second, I actually like where this is going. Using Hudson's past tragedies on him. And, basically making it to where he's kind of actually going crazy like the third game. I'm actually liking this. I'm liking the direction it's going. Because he's already like, "Oh, I'm going to go crazy. I have no friends or family." And, it's going to make him go nutty. Because I didn't even think about the fact that they could use that against him. Because when the Springtrap, or the Fluffy Green Rabbit, as this book calls it, speaks to him, I'm thinking, oh, it's going to be William or something. But honestly, I think this story is going to go in an interest. Well, we're going to find out next time. Because this time we read pages 200 to... Oh, wrong one. We read pages 181 to 200. Next time we'll be reading pages 201 and 227. And also, I got to see that again. When did I add that? I don't remember adding that animation. That's so cool. Let's see that again. Whoop. That's super cool. All right, sorry. I just didn't know. I didn't know that was something I added. Next time we'll be reading 26 pages, which sounds like murder. But it'll be fun. It'll be the end of the story, and I kind of am predicting what the story's going to be already. It's going to just be an average end. But yeah, it's going to be pretty cool too, I hope. So yeah, super fantastic, wonderful day, y'all. Be polite, be efficient. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. This book's going crazy. I'm really... I hated the first section, hated the second section. Really am enjoying the third section. And when everything is said and done, we're going to go into the tier list. So yeah, that'll be fun. Alrighty, y'all. Have yourself a super fantastic, wonderful day. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye!